Picture ancient Rome, marble pillars, burning torches, the scent of wine and incense in the air, and in the center of the empire, a man walks through the forum with his bride, draped in silk, glowing with jewels, delicate, perfect, but the crowd stares for a different reason. Not just because she's stunning, not just because she walks beside Emperor Nero, but because they know the truth. That woman, that bride, used to be a boy. His name was Sporus. And what Nero did to him is so chilling, so disturbing, that even 2,000 years later, we're still haunted. This is not a love story. It's not even a tragedy. It's a psychological horror, born from grief, delusion, and power unchecked. To understand how we got here, we have to go back. Back to the only person Nero ever truly loved. Her name was Poppaea Sabina. And once she was gone, Nero would stop at nothing to bring her back, even if it meant turning another human being into a ghost of her memory. The golden beginning. When Nero first became emperor, Rome breathed a sigh of relief. He was just 16, and for a while, he ruled like a dream. He cut taxes, he funded theater, he performed music for the masses, he acted like a man of the people. He was charming, charismatic. Rome had hope, but something happens when a man holds that much power. When everyone around you bows and nods and calls you a god, you start believing you are one. And slowly, piece by piece, Nero stopped listening. He stopped smiling. And then he stopped caring. Enter Poppaea. Beautiful, dangerous, sharp-tongued, graceful, politically brilliant. She wasn't just a woman, she was a force. Nero was married to someone else at the time, the quiet and noble Octavia. But Poppaea? She was everything Octavia wasn't. The affair began like most palace scandals. Secret glances, rush meetings behind pillars, but it didn't stay quiet long. Nero wanted Poppaea in the open, and he wanted her now. So he divorced Octavia, exiled her, and within months, married Poppaea in a ceremony so lavish it made senators gasp. The possession begins from the outside. It looked like passion. But inside the palace walls, something darker was growing. Nero didn't just love Poppaea. He possessed her. He stationed guards around her at all times, not for protection, but for surveillance. He watched her movements, controlled who she spoke to. She wasn't a wife. She was a prized statue in a golden cage. He commissioned portraits, sculptures, even jewelry inspired by her image. Poppaea's face wasn't just in Nero's heart. It was everywhere. And yet, she remained composed. She played the game well, knowing full well the dangers of loving a god in human skin. But the truth was, Poppaea wasn't afraid of Nero. She was smart enough to use his obsession as leverage. She expanded her influence. She promoted allies. She protected herself. And she did the one thing no one else in Rome dared to do. She challenged him. She critiqued his singing, his performances. She argued with him about policy. She laughed when others stayed silent. And for a time, that fire kept Nero close. But fire can also burn. The death of an empress had happened in 65 AD. She was pregnant. They were arguing. Some say over politics. Others say Nero had returned late from his chariot races. What happened next is a blur in the records, but every version ends the same. In a fit of rage, Nero struck Poppaea. Some say it was a single blow to her stomach. Others say it was a violent beating. All agree. It killed her. Her unborn child died with her. And suddenly, the most powerful man in the world was on his knees, weeping beside the body of the only person who made him feel human. But Nero didn't cry like a widower. He cried like a child who broke his favorite toy. He ordered physicians to revive her. He screamed at her body to wake up. He locked himself in his room, refused to eat, refused to govern. Rome waited and watched and whispered. When he finally emerged, something was off. He ordered her corpse to be embalmed, not burned as tradition demanded. He built her a tomb that rivaled God's. He held banquets, with her empty chair still reserved. He spoke to her, ghost, demanded others pretend she was still alive. The emperor had lost more than a wife. He'd lost his grip on reality. Then he saw Sporus, a boy, 14, maybe 15, a servant in the imperial household, not noble, not important, but he had her eyes, her cheekbones, a delicate face that flickered with echoes of Poppaea. And in that moment, Nero made a decision. He would bring her back, no matter what. And if he couldn't bring back the real Poppaea, he would create her. The boy's name was Sporus. No noble blood, no political power, just a palace servant, quiet, compliant, invisible, until Nero looked at him. And when he did, he didn't see a boy, he saw Poppaea, or at least, the closest thing to her the empire would allow. Sporus's delicate features, smooth skin, and haunting eyes triggered something in Nero's mind, a hallucination made real. And in that instant, a decision was made. Not by Sporus, but about Sporus. The order that changed everything. No one dared question it. When the emperor speaks, even the impossible becomes law. Nero called in his physicians, his surgeons, his loyal advisors. He whispered instructions that chilled even the cruelest among them. Sporus was to be castrated. Not because he wanted it, not because he chose it, but because Nero demanded a living replica of his dead empress. He didn't want a servant anymore. He wanted a wife. Imagine that moment. Sporus, a child held down by palace guards. No warning, no explanation, no right to say no. The procedure was brutal. No anesthesia, no antiseptic. Just the sharp edge of a blade and the screams of a boy forced to become something he never asked for. And when it was done, he was dressed, painted, transformed, not into himself, but into her. Becoming Poppy, and Nero assigned him maids, stylists, perfumers. Sporus was bathed daily in oils. He was dressed in silks once worn by Poppia herself. He was taught to walk with grace, to speak softly, to nod like royalty. But the mirrors told a different story. Behind the rouge and gold, behind the eyeliner and fabric, was a boy with haunted eyes. Sporus didn't become powerful. He didn't become loved. He became a doll, a puppet stitched together with grief, obsession, and cruelty. And yet, Nero didn't just parade him through the palace halls. He went further. He married him. The imperial wedding had happened quietly at first, behind palace doors. A small ceremony, only the closest confidants, no records, no history books to preserve it. But Nero, delusional with grief and pride, couldn't keep it secret for long. Within days, Rome was buzzing. The emperor had married a boy. But not just any boy, a boy he castrated and renamed after his dead wife. And it didn't stop there. Nero made him dress as an empress during public appearances. He called him Poppia in front of senators. He took him on official tours, hand in hand. Like a royal couple, the whispers grew louder. What kind of monster? Has Rome lost its mind? Who is Sporus? And what is he suffering? The living nightmare. But Sporus couldn't run. He couldn't rebel. He couldn't even cry aloud. The walls had ears, and Nero's moods were deadly. So he obeyed day after day, banquet after banquet, laying beside a man who pretended he was someone else, someone already dead. Nero would talk to him at night like he was Poppia returned. He'd stroke his hair and whisper apologies, and sometimes he'd weep. But those tears were not for Sporus. They were for the phantom Nero refused to let go of. And in that obsession, Sporus ceased to exist. The empress in chains. This wasn't love. It wasn't even delusion anymore. It was ritualized madness. And Sporus was the sacrifice. He was displayed during plays, applauded by forced crowds. He sat beside Nero at the Circus Maximus, dressed in bridal veils. Roman historians, even those who tried to justify Nero's rule, wrote in disbelief. He called him Poppia Sabina, and used him as a wife, even in public, as if she were risen again. Even Rome, brutal and decadent as it was, shuddered, because for all their gladiators and cruelty, this was something else. The collapse. But madness has an expiration date. By the time Nero was 30, his empire was crumbling. The Senate turned on him. His army no longer saluted. Rebellion sparked across provinces. And through it all, Sporus remained by his side, because he had no choice. As Nero fled the capital, disguised and alone, he brought with him only a few things: a dagger, a single loyal slave, and Sprucevan. In his final hours, Nero clung to the ghost of Poppia, to the boy he mutilated, to the illusion he couldn't live without. Nero's end came swiftly. Cornered by his own downfall, abandoned by soldiers, and betrayed by the Senate, the once untouchable emperor became a hunted man. He had only a few followers left, and among them was Sporus, the boy who had no reason to stay, but no means to escape. The final night, it was in a small, decaying villa outside Rome where Nero made his final decision. News had reached him. The Senate had declared him a public enemy. Execution awaited. Panicked, delusional, and still wrapped in his royal robe, he turned to Sporus one last time. You must mourn me properly," he said, pressing a silver urn into Sporus' shaking hands. Sporus said nothing. Because what could he say? He was never Nero's wife. He wasn't even allowed to be a boy. He was a reflection of someone dead, a shell forced to breathe. And as Nero held the dagger to his throat, trembling and unable to strike, it was Sporus who tried to help him die faster. The guards would later whisper that Sporus guided the blade. The empire moves on, but Sporus can't. With Nero dead, Rome tried to wipe the slate clean. But the boy who had been paraded as an empress, he was still alive, still young, still broken, and now in danger. Because Sporus wasn't a symbol of Rome's power anymore. He was a reminder of Nero's madness, of the shame the Senate tried to bury, of how far the empire had fallen. So what did they do? They handed him over again to the next ruler. Upon in another game a new emperor had risen, although, and believe it or not, Otho had once been married to the real Poppaea Sabina. Yes, Nero's dead wife. Which meant when he saw Sporus, something twisted clicked. He, too, took Sporus as a companion, not out of love, not out of sympathy, but out of vanity and possession. Because in Rome, if you could own the thing Nero cherished most, you were greater than Nero. So once again, Sporus found himself in a cage with gold bars, different emperor, same prison, the inevitable fall. But Otho didn't last long. After just 3 months, he killed himself amid civil war, leaving Sporus alone. Again. And then came Vitellius, the next ruler. Vitellius didn't want to own Sporus. He wanted to make an example out of him. Rumors say Vitellius planned to execute Sporus publicly, but not just by sword. No. This was going to be entertainment. He planned to dress Sporus as a bride again and have him violated by a wild animal in the arena. Yes, you read that right. Rome, in its thirst for blood and shame, wanted to watch a boy who had been forced into marriage be publicly raped and killed. The escape no one saw coming, but that day never came. Sporus, now older, quieter, and carrying years of torment in his soul, made his final decision. He chose his own end. Rather than die screaming in front of thousands, he took his life in secret, quiet, alone. Just like he had lived. There was no empire watching, no applause, no curtain call, just a boy, carved into a shape he never asked for. Finally allowed to vanish. Rome forgot. But history didn't. The story of Sporus didn't get carved in marble. There were no songs, no odes, no statues in his name. But his name survived, buried in the scrolls of Suetonius, Tacitus, Cassius Dio. Not because he was a hero, but because he was a symbol of how power destroys innocence. He was used by men who called themselves gods. Stripped of identity, forced into a role, and then discarded when it no longer served them. Who was Sporus, really? We'll never know who Sporus could have been. A poet, a thinker, a lover. He never got the chance. Because in a world ruled by mad kings, he was just a mirror, a walking wound dressed in silk. And behind every royal ceremony, every lavish banquet, every chariot parade, there was a boy silently screaming under layers of makeup and lies. And maybe that's why his story matters. Because history likes to remember emperors, but sometimes it's the victims we need to remember more. So their silence doesn't repeat. And so we learn how power, left unchecked, doesn't just burn cities. It burns people. Final lines. Sporus wasn't Poppaea. He wasn't Nero's wife, or Rome's shame. He was a boy who was never allowed to be one. And that is the real tragedy. You might think Sporus' story ended with his death, but Rome wasn't done with him. Not really. Because every emperor that came after, every palace whisper, every scandalous retelling of Nero's madness, Sporus was there, in shadow, and the story of the boy who was forced to be a bride, whose identity was shaped by power, pain, and perversion. It haunted the empire for centuries. Rome's cruel entertainment addiction, you see. Rome had a habit, a dark, insatiable habit. It fed on spectacle. It thrived on humiliation. It craved control over bodies that couldn't fight back. And what Nero did to Sporus, it wasn't isolated. Rome made slaves perform sexual plays for the rich. Gladiators were stripped, wounded, and made to die beautifully. Emperors like Elagabalus and Caligula blurred the line between intimacy and punishment, forcing their lovers to wear masks of dead relatives. So when Nero castrated a young boy and made him his bride, people whispered. They gossiped, but they didn't stop him, because cruelty was currency in the empire, and Sporus became the currency of Nero's madness. Was Sporus ever loved? This is the question that cracks hearts, because if Sporus was just a victim, why didn't he run? Why did he stay? Some historians argue it was Stockholm Syndrome. Others suggest he had no other identity left to return to. But some believe there was a sliver of love, not from Nero, not from Otho, not from Rome, but maybe from Sporus to himself. That maybe, just maybe, he dressed in silks not because he was forced to, but because he knew no other armor, a reflection of Poppaea, or a lost identity. Remember, Nero didn't just see Sporus as a boy, he saw Poppaea, the woman he lost, the empress he accidentally killed while pregnant, the woman who challenged him, then died under his own foot in a rage. When Sporus was dressed, paraded, and renamed, Nero wasn't honoring Sporus. He was resurrecting a ghost, but in doing so, he erased the real boy who stood behind the mascara. The lost writings of Spore ushers something even darker. Some scrolls suggest Sporus may have written, yes, written poems, personal letters, even fragments of prayers, but Rome, ever terrified of letting victims tell their truth, burned or buried those documents. To this day, not a single verified word from Sporus's own hand exists, not one. The echo in modern times. You might wonder, why does this matter? Because Sporus's story is still being repeated today. Young people, forced into roles they didn't choose. Queer kids punished for how they love or who they are. People castrated by culture, faith, family, not by blade, but by pressure. Every time someone is stripped of choice and forced into someone else's version of them, a piece of Sporus lives on. His name was not wife, it was Sporus. And though history has only scratched at the surface of his life, we owe him something to remember. Not the scandal, not the emperors, not the silk robes or the false wedding, but the boy, the one they never let live, yet couldn't quite silence. Rome will never apologize. History rarely gives closure. Nero wasn't held accountable. The empire never said sorry, but maybe our retelling, and truth and grit, and ugly honesty, is the closest thing Sporus will ever get to justice. Because the moment we stop treating his story like a footnote, the moment we tell it loudly, we unearth something powerful, that even in silence a boy can shake an empire.